My parents handed over our family's auto repair business to my unmotivated younger brother. I was the one who sustained it for years. So I exited, taking the clientele with me, and watched him drive it into ruin. Hey, Reddit. I usually just browse silently here, but events have spiraled out of control, so I decided to post. I'm Tyler, 30, male. I grew up in a New York town where everyone knew everyone else's name, and the only real measure of respect was how grimy your hands got by sunset. My hands were perpetually dirty. Our family owns a local auto shop, Walker's Auto. It's been in the family since my granddad founded it in the 60s with just a few tools and a battered Ford. He used to call it his third child. The shop endured 2 economic downturns, several floods, and more family squabbles than I can recall. And through all of it, I was the one constantly beneath the hoods. Not because I was the designated heir or some mechanical genius, but simply because I had no alternative. Since the age of 12, I was practically living in that garage. Saturdays, summers, even sick days, it made no difference. My father didn't believe in taking breaks. I was the designated parts runner, floor sweeper, and oil stain scrubber. I learned to replace brake pads before I learned to shave, and the surprising part is, I never complained. I actually cherished the work. The scent of grease, the satisfying click of a perfectly tightened ratchet. I was proud of what we had built. The only problem? They never truly included me. From the very beginning, my parents were fixated on my younger brother Dylan, 28, male. 2 years my junior, same last name, yet entirely different lives. I'd be under a car by 8 a.m. Dylan would still be in bed, playing Xbox and shouting at his friends through his headset. I once inquired of my mother why Dylan never had to assist. She replied, "He's not as responsible as you. You're simply better at this stuff." Translation: you do all the labor because we know you won't object. They indulged him with everything. When he withdrew from his first semester of community college, they purchased him a used Camaro to boost his confidence. Meanwhile, I was rehabilitating a '97 Dodge Ram. My granddad had given me a rust bucket, but it was mine. I invested months in that truck. Nights after school, weekends after shifts, watching YouTube tutorials, phoning scrapyards searching for the correct components. That truck was more than just a vehicle. It was the first thing I ever constructed independently. Grandpa Joe would often stroll by while I was working on it and remark, "This shop will be yours someday, kid. You've got real determination." That comment resonated with me. It still does. Then Dylan totaled it. I was 18. I arrived home from a shift. The truck wasn't in the driveway. I wondered if it had been towed. Perhaps I'd forgotten to engage the parking brake. Something foolish like that. No, Dylan had taken the keys without permission. He'd gone joyriding to impress some girl and T-boned a telephone pole. The front end was demolished. The hood buckled. The radiator burst open like a soda can. And do you know what my parents said? "Tyler, you should have concealed the keys better. You know your brother is impulsive." I swear, if I had any remaining hope in that moment, it was crushed flatter than that grill. They didn't make him compensate for it. They didn't ground him. They didn't even make him apologize. I had to clean up the truck myself on my day off. And I vividly remember my dad muttering that I should be more vigilant next time. As if it were my fault someone else stole my own damn car. That's when I understood. They didn't perceive me as a son. They viewed me as a mere instrument. A wrench that walked and talked. Even after all that, I remained. I continued working at the shop. After Grandpa passed, I assumed even more responsibility. My dad began to decline, becoming forgetful and short-tempered. I managed customer calls, processed invoices, and taught myself bookkeeping to avoid hiring an external firm. Dylan appeared perhaps twice a week, and when he did, he just caused disruptions. One time he stripped a bolt on a customer's wheel hub because he was texting while torquing it. Do you realize how hazardous that is? It could have been lethal. My dad simply dismissed it. He's learning. Meanwhile, I'd face reprimand if I was 5 minutes late returning from lunch. My dog, Max, was the only one who ever acted like he truly saw me. He'd rest by my feet in the back office while I handled payroll. A rescue, half lab, half who knows what. loyal as could be. Every time I started questioning if I was crazy for staying, I'd glance down at him curled on the mat and think, no, I'm building something here. This will eventually pay off. It has to, right? Then came Easter. A large family barbecue in our backyard. Tables arranged. The entire extended family was there, uncles, cousins, even people I didn't recognize. We were grilling ribs and burgers, everyone appearing to be one big, happy group. And right there, in front of everyone, my dad stood up and tapped his glass. As if toasting a wedding. I just want to express how proud I am of Dylan, he began. And I'm thrilled to officially announce that he'll be taking over Walker's Auto. We're passing the torch to the next generation. People applauded. I looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak up, to look at me and say, wait, what? About Tyler. But no, just forced smiles and forks clinking on plates. I looked at my dad and asked, are you serious? He didn't even flinch. You made your choice, son. You chose animals. No, I didn't. I chose hard work. I chose accountability. I chose to show up. I chose to believe in a promise my grandfather made me every day until he died. They just never chose me back. The Monday following that Easter announcement, I still went to the shop. Call it habit, call it foolishness. I'd been doing it for so long, quitting cold turkey felt impossible. My alarm sounded at 6:30 as usual. Max accompanied me to the door, and I drove the same route I'd traversed since I was 16. I hadn't even finished half my first coffee before I was standing in that familiar oil-stained parking lot. The nature of working in a family business is that you don't merely wear one hat. You're the mechanic, the bookkeeper, the janitor, the person who rushes to the parts store because someone forgot to order brake pads. And because it's family, none of that earns you a raise, a bonus, or even a simple thank you. It's just expected. That morning, Dad was already in the office with Dylan. They were discussing future plans for the shop. My future apparently wasn't on the meeting agenda. Dad didn't even glance up when I entered. Dylan smirked like he'd just been appointed CEO of a major corporation. Ty, grab Bay 3, transmission job. Dad barked without so much as a greeting. No good morning. No how are you? Not even a thank you for still showing up after they had just publicly handed my job to someone else. Just a brusque command, as if I were a temporary weekend hire. Fine, whatever. I've always believed actions speak louder than words anyway, so I got to it. The customer's Camry was on the lift within 10 minutes, and I was elbow deep in transmission fluid before Dylan even meandered onto the shop floor. He was wearing one of those immaculate shop shirts with his name embroidered on it, sleeves rolled up as if he were about to accomplish something useful. Spoiler alert, he didn't.
He ambled around, checking on things, which typically meant
leaning on toolboxes and conversing with customers as if he'd actually repair their cars. That's how it was every day after Easter. I performed the actual labor. Dylan played the part. He'd photograph himself feigning work on an engine and post them online, portraying himself as the lifeblood of Walker's Auto. Customers unaware of the truth bought into it. Nice to see the next generation stepping up, they'd comment. Meanwhile, I was the one on my knees wrestling with a seized bolt, sweat dripping into my eyes. Jack, my cousin, witnessed it all. He'd been working part-time at the shop since high school to save for trade school, and he wasn't oblivious to the favoritism. One slow Tuesday, he leaned over while we were replacing rotors and said, "Man, if I were you, I'd be gone already." I explained I couldn't just abandon it. In my mind, this was still Grandpa Joe's shop, the place he built with his own hands. I wasn't going to be the one to forsake it, even if it had already forsaken me. Jack shook his head. Loyalty is commendable, Ty, but not to people who wouldn't reciprocate it. I didn't respond, but his words lingered. The favoritism wasn't confined to work, it permeated every aspect of our lives. If I arrived home 5 minutes late for Sunday dinner, Mom would lecture me about respecting family time. Dylan could waltz in 2 hours late with fast food in hand and elicit a laugh. Oh, traffic must have been terrible, huh? If I borrowed the shop truck for a supply run and neglected to refill the tank, Dad would react as if I'd pilfered his retirement savings. Dylan could leave the tank empty for 3 days, and no one would utter a word. And then there was the lesser betrayal, the precursor to the major blow-up. In retrospect, it was almost a warning shot. A few months after Easter, one of our regulars, Mr. Louis, brought in his F-150 for brake service. I'd been servicing his trucks for years. He trusted me implicitly. While I was working on it, Dylan emerged and informed me Dad wanted me to switch to another job because Dylan needed some hands-on time. Translation: let Dylan tinker with the expensive toy. I wasn't thrilled, but fine. I transitioned to the Subaru and Bay one. Less than an hour later, Mr. Lewis was back in the shop, face flushed, asserting his truck's brakes were worse than before. It turned out Dylan had neglected to properly torque the caliper bolts, and the entire assembly was rattling loose. Dad's response? He blamed me for not inspecting Dylan's work before the customer departed, as if I were supposed to be the unpaid quality control manager for someone supposedly in charge. That night, I returned home furious. Max sat by my feet while I browsed job listings just to gauge the market. But something within me still couldn't pull the trigger. This was still my place, even if they had given it to someone else. The workload continued to mount. I was managing payroll, ordering components, repairing the actual vehicles, and training the part-timers. Dylan was engaging in business development, which, as far as I could discern, meant lounging in the office and making calls to his friends about weekend plans. Dad would gush about Dylan's leadership abilities while disregarding the fact that every single repair order bore my handwriting. Mom was no better. She'd occasionally stop by the shop with lunch, always Dylan's preferred subs. Never once did she offer me a coffee in the mornings. Minor details, but they accumulate when it's an everyday occurrence. Jack began speaking more candidly about it. "They're setting you up for failure, man," he stated one Thursday night as we were closing. "Dylan's the public face. You're the working hands. Guess who gets the accolades when things go well and who gets the blame when they go wrong?" I knew he was right, but I still showed up the next morning because that's what I did. One Friday afternoon, Dad called a staff meeting. All 4 of us, myself, Dylan, Dad, and Jack, stood in the shop while Dad reviewed new procedures. Essentially, Dylan was receiving a raise to reflect his new responsibilities. My pay remained exactly the same. Jack's too. Jack spoke up, an act I'll never forget. "So Dylan gets more for standing around, and Ty and I continue doing the same. Work for the same money?" Dad gave him that look, the one that communicates, "You're moments away from being jobless." Jack fell silent, but the damage was done. I could tell Dylan was reveling in every second. In the ensuing weeks, I noticed Dylan making increasingly significant blunders. Ordering incorrect parts, forgetting to bill customers, double booking bays. Each time, Dad found a way to attribute it to someone else, usually me. I stopped correcting him. Why expend the effort? Then came the day that finally pushed me closer to the precipice. A supplier arrived with an overdue notice for nearly $15,000 worth of parts. I knew we had consistently paid our invoices on time. I handled the checks myself. It turned out Dylan had diverted some of the payments to cover his own marketing expenses, which included a lot of useless items like an unnecessary neon shop sign and branded hats nobody requested. The worst part? Dad defended him, claiming he was investing in the shop's image. That night, Jack texted me, "One day, you're going to realize you're the sole reason that place is still operational." I looked at Max, curled up on the couch, and for the first time, I began to believe it. People love to exclaim, "Why didn't you just leave?" As if it's some miraculous remedy for every dreadful situation. It's easy to say when it's not your blood, your sweat, your actual fingerprints on the tools. I didn't stay because I craved their approval or hoped they'd suddenly treat me fairly. I stayed because Walker's Auto was still my shop, even if my name wasn't on the official documents. Grandpa built it. I matured within its walls. Every vehicle that passed through those bays had likely been touched by my hands at some point. You don't simply abandon that because someone decides your brother should play the boss. And yes, perhaps part of it was ego. I wasn't about to hand Dylan the keys and let him drive the establishment into a ditch without at least attempting to preserve it. If I were to eventually depart, I wanted it to be on my terms, not because they forced me out. So I continued to show up. I was there before anyone else. Most mornings, Max would ride shotgun. I'd unlock the doors, switch on the lights, and begin reviewing the day's appointments before the first wrench was even lifted. It wasn't about impressing Dad or Mom anymore. Those days were long gone, but customers still trusted me. They'd request me by name. Some of these individuals had been bringing their cars to the shop since before I was born. If I wasn't there, I knew they'd start going elsewhere. And that would provide Dad with another excuse to claim the business was struggling and hand more authority to Dylan. The irony was, the more I labored, the more Dylan strutted. He'd arrive at 10 a.m. like he owned the place. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other, wearing a jacket that seemed purchased for posing beside a car, not for working on one. He wasn't even pretending to exert effort anymore. He'd speak to customers, as if he were doing them a favor, then duck back into the office to scroll through Instagram. One morning, an elderly woman, Mrs. Grant, came in. She drove a '98 Corolla that belonged in a museum for cars that miraculously still ran. A sweet woman, but her car was emitting a terrible grinding noise. Dylan quoted her for new brakes and a new transmission, as if he were attempting to clear the shop's debts in a single sale. She looked on the verge of tears. I discreetly pulled her aside while he was on the phone and informed her it was only the brakes. A $300 job at most. I fixed it myself that afternoon. Naturally, Dylan discovered this, and instead of thanking me for not fleecing a customer, he stormed out and accused me of undermining his authority. I retorted that authority is earned, not bestowed at a family barbecue. He didn't appreciate that response. Dad summoned me to the office later and instructed me to support Dylan's decisions from now on. I simply gazed at him and stated, "Not if it means cheating people." Then I walked out. I could hear him muttering something behind me, but I didn't care. Jack observed everything. He'd come in after his classes and assist with tire changes or oil jobs, and we'd converse in the back when things slowed down. One day, while we were stacking tires, he commented, "You're practically keeping this place operational by yourself." "Yes," I said, "and that's why I'm still here. Because if I leave, it's over and I'm not allowing Dylan to tell people I abandoned the family." "Not yet," Jack nodded. "Just don't let not yet become forever." I heard him, but I wasn't finished proving my point. I wasn't finished ensuring customers received honest work. And deep down, I wasn't finished safeguarding Grandpa's legacy from being transformed into some slipshod Instagram brand. But staying didn't mean remaining silent. A couple of weeks later, I began meticulously recording everything. Every job I performed, every part one ordered, every repair I corrected after Dylan's blunders, I documented it. Not because I thought Dad would suddenly believe me, but because I knew one day this information could be crucial. If things went south, I wanted records. I also started communicating directly with suppliers instead of letting Dylan handle it. That's how I discovered he'd been placing orders on credit without informing anyone, accumulating thousands in debt. He'd tell Dad it was strategic, as if debt were just another business tool. I knew better. It was sheer laziness and recklessness. The first time I brought it up, Dad dismissed it. "He's learning," he said. The same line I'd heard since Dylan stripped that bolt years ago. Same excuse, different debacle. But here's the difference. Unlike before, I didn't just accept it. I challenged Dylan directly, right there in the office. Learning on someone else's dime isn't learning. It's screwing over the people who keep bailing you out, he laughed.
He actually laughed in my face. "You act like this is your shop."
I didn't flinch. "It's more mine than yours, and you know it." Silence. Dad didn't intervene. Mom wasn't there to smooth things over. Dylan just shook his head and walked away. I could feel the tension escalate, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to be liked anymore. Customers also began to notice the cracks. A few regulars quietly asked if everything was all right. They mentioned Dylan seemed distracted. That work was taking longer than it used to. I'd simply tell them we were busy and changed the subject. I wasn't about to start bad-mouthing my family to outsiders. But inside, I was finished protecting them from the truth. Then came the smaller breaking point, the one that truly revealed how far gone things were. A man named Carson brought in his Mustang. It required a clutch replacement. An expensive job, but nothing we couldn't handle. I ordered the parts myself and set aside the following day to work on it. I arrived that morning and the parts were gone, vanished. I looked around, checked the storage shelves, reviewed the delivery logs. Nothing. Then I spotted Dylan in the corner with his phone, grinning. It turned out he had sold the clutch kit to one of his friends off the books for cash. Claimed it was good networking. Carson's car sat on the lift for 4 additional days while I reordered everything. And of course, Dad blamed me for not maintaining better inventory records. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Max lying beneath my feet and told myself, one more major screw-up from him and I'm done. Not leaving because I'm exhausted. Not leaving because they want me gone. Leaving because I decide. It's time. And I'd walk out with my head held high and my work impeccable. And yes, perhaps part of me wanted to remain long enough to witness Dylan fail on his own, not out of malice. Okay, maybe a little malice, but mostly because I wanted everyone to see that without me, the place couldn't function. I wanted them to experience the burden of what they had taken for granted. So I continued working, continued logging, kept my head down when it was prudent, and spoke up when it wasn't. And I waited because every empire built on deceit eventually crumbles. And I wasn't going to miss the day this one finally fractured. If there's one thing I've learned about family businesses, it's that loyalty only flows in one direction when favoritism is at play. And at Walker's Auto, that direction was toward Dylan. No matter what he broke, who he angered, or how much money he squandered, somehow it always became my responsibility. The significant loss occurred in mid-September, just as business typically accelerates because everyone wants their cars inspected before winter. We held a major fleet account with a local construction company. 8 trucks we serviced regularly. They were excellent customers, paid promptly, no drama, always brought work to us instead of the dealership. That account alone covered almost a third of our monthly revenue. Their boss, Mike, always contacted me directly. We had a system. He'd drop off a couple of trucks at a time. I'd complete them within a week. And he'd pick them up ready to go, smooth, predictable, until Dylan decided he wanted to streamline things. I arrived on Monday and discovered Dylan had persuaded Mike to bring in all 8 trucks at once so we could perform a bulk service and save them money. Which sounds reasonable on paper, but we lacked the manpower, the space, or the parts to service 8 trucks simultaneously. That's the kind of suggestion you offer a customer only if you've never actually turned a wrench. I told Dylan directly, this is a terrible idea. We're going to bottleneck the shop, irritate other customers, and completely derail the schedule. He waved me off as if I were overreacting. Relax, I've got it under control. Translation, I'm going to dump it on you and vanish. Sure enough. By Wednesday, we had 4 trucks dismantled, 3 more still waiting outside, and customers complaining their cars were stuck for days because the bays were full. To compound the problem, Dylan ordered the wrong parts for 2 of the fleet truck's rotors that didn't fit and filters for the incorrect engine model. I had to reorder everything overnight, incurring additional costs. Mike stopped by on Thursday, witnessed the chaos, and pulled the plug. He instructed us to reassemble the trucks as they were, stating he would take his business elsewhere. Just like that, we forfeited a $90,000 a year account because Dylan wanted to play the big shot manager. I thought perhaps, just perhaps, this time Dad would see it for what it truly was. You don't lose an account of that magnitude every day, and it was undeniably clear who had caused it. But when I was summoned into the office Friday morning, Dad was seated behind the desk with Dylan leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, smirking like a child who knows the teacher is on his side.
Tyler, Dad began, we took a major hit this week. No kidding, I retorted. And you know exactly why.
Dad's jaw tightened. I don't want attitude. The bottom line is we lost a client, and we have to compensate for the difference somehow. We cannot afford that kind of loss without cutting costs. I waited, expecting him to tell Dylan he would dock his pay or curtail whatever useless expenditures he was making with shop money. Instead, Dad leaned forward and stated, "We're going to have to withhold your salary this month." I laughed. I actually laughed because I genuinely thought he was jesting. "You're telling me Dylan sinks a major account and you're seizing my paycheck. You're older. You can handle it," Dad said, as if discussing lending someone a lawnmower. "Dylan is still finding his footing. We can't impose that kind of pressure on him right now." I stared at him, then looked at Dylan. "You cost us $90,000 a year and you're still getting paid?" Dylan shrugged. "I'm not the one throwing a tantrum like a toddler." I didn't even bother looking at him. I wasn't going to grant him that satisfaction. I just sat back in the chair and let them believe they had won. Inside, I was already calculating. They thought withholding my pay would sting enough to make me submit and continue. They didn't realize it was the precise move I had been awaiting. I rose slowly, calmly. "All right," I said, almost as if I were agreeing with them. "If that's how you wish to proceed, I will work with it." The dad's eyebrows furrowed. "What's that supposed to imply?" "You'll see," I informed him. "Just ensure you remember this day." Then I proceeded directly to my locker, opened it, and retrieved my personal set of tools. Not the inexpensive, worn-out ones the shop provided, but the custom equipment I had acquired myself over the years, the snap-on torque wrenches, the specialized sockets, the diagnostic scanner I had saved for months to purchase. Every tool that genuinely made this shop operate smoothly. All mine. Paid for in full, and I wasn't leaving a single one behind. Jack was rotating tires in Bay 2 when he noticed. "What's happening?" "They've been exploiting me for years," I stated, loading my gear into the truck. "Now I'm going to ensure they remember precisely what I contributed to this place, and what occurs when I'm gone." Jack simply nodded. He didn't ask questions. He knew I wasn't bluffing. Max leaped into the passenger seat as if he had been anticipating this day as well. I drove away without a single backward glance, but my mind was already arranging the pieces. One possessed contacts, customers who trusted me, suppliers who knew I paid promptly, even a few mechanics in town who disliked working for corporate shops and would defect for the right opportunity. All I needed to do was set the plan in motion. Quietly. No shouting matches, no public spectacle, just a slow, controlled unraveling of every thread holding Walker's auto together until it fell apart in my hands. If they wanted Dylan to be the face of the shop, then I was going to ensure he was also the face people blamed when everything collapsed. When I drove away from the shop that day with my tools in the back and Max beside me, they likely assumed I'd go home, sulk, and perhaps return crawling once my pride subsided. That's how they had conditioned themselves to perceive me, the dependable one, the resilient one, the guy who would never truly depart because I cared too deeply. They didn't realize I'd been paying attention for years, not just to the cars, but to how the shop functioned, who we relied on, and who we couldn't afford to alienate. If I were to leave, I wasn't doing so empty-handed. I was taking the one thing they couldn't replace, trust. And I already knew precisely how to accomplish it. You don't simply cripple a shop by bad-mouthing them. That's amateur hour. You do it by ensuring everyone who matters has your contact information before you disappear. First, the customers, not the random, one-time oil change walk-ins. I'm talking about the regulars, the individuals who called me directly instead of the shop's main line. I had at least 50 of them saved in my phone, all under first names with their car models. Mike, Silverado. Pete, Civic. Ralph, Jeep Wrangler. That represented years of cultivated relationships right there. I sent them all the same message. "Hey, it's Tyler from Walker's. Not with the shop anymore. If you ever need work done, I'm establishing my own venture soon. I'll ensure you're taken care of." Nothing derogatory. No disparaging remarks about Dylan or my parents. Just planting the seed, then the suppliers. I maintained excellent standing with them because I paid promptly, every single time, even when Dad procrastinated. I called each representative personally. Informed them I was stepping away, but might have some private work coming their way. Every single one of them provided me with their cell numbers and told me to call any time. That told me everything I needed to know. The door was wide open. I wasn't about to open a full-fledged shop overnight. Too obvious, too conspicuous. Instead, I leased a small two-bay garage from a retired mechanic I knew. An old place, nothing fancy, but it had a lift, decent lighting, and a corner office. Just big enough for a desk, a coffee maker, and Max's old dog bed while I worked. The rent was incredibly cheap because the owner simply wanted someone to prevent the building from deteriorating. I began slowly. Brake jobs, minor engine work. Tire rotations, the kind of tasks that didn't demand much overhead. The regulars I had texted started arriving, one by one. I offered them fair prices, rapid turnaround, and zero nonsense. They informed their acquaintances. I didn't even need to advertise. And because I had been observant, I knew precisely which services Walker's Auto disliked performing. The tedious ones that didn't generate substantial profit but maintained customer loyalty. I accepted every single one of those jobs. Wheel bearing replacements? Done. Electrical diagnostics? Certainly. I see recharges in the middle of July. Bring them in. It didn't take long before I was booked 2 weeks in advance. Here's the truth. About individuals like Dylan, you don't have to actively destroy them. You merely have to cease protecting them. Without me there to discreetly rectify his errors, every single one became public. The botched Mustang clutch job. The wrongly installed Jeep lift kit that chewed through tires in a month. He began accumulating negative online reviews, the kind customers don't easily forget. And instead of resolving the issues, he'd argue with them, labeling them overly particular or blaming the parts. I didn't lift a finger to orchestrate that. I simply stayed occupied and kept my head down. But I did keep my ear to the ground. Jack would call me every couple of weeks with updates, unpaid parts bills, more missed deadlines, another valuable customer walking away. Each time I'd make a note. I wasn't just building a client list. I was building a case. 3 months in, I got my true opening. One of our largest shared accounts, a landscaping company with 15 trucks, called me directly. Their owner, Lise, had been a Walker's Auto loyalist for 15 years, primarily due to my service. He informed me Dylan had missed a scheduled maintenance check. 2 trucks had broken down in the same week, and when he complained, Dylan had retorted, "That's just how older trucks are." Lise asked if I could assume responsibility for their fleet service. I agreed, but only if they made a complete separation from Walker's Auto, no halfway nonsense. He didn't even hesitate. That account alone was worth approximately $60,000 annually. When word reached my parents, they called me not to apologize, not to admit they had been mistaken. Dad's voice was cold. "We hear you've been poaching customers." "No," I responded. "I've been caring for people you didn't value. There's a distinction." Click. By month 5, my garage was operating at full capacity. I had hired one part-timer, a student from the local tech school, and was seriously contemplating a second lift. The best part? Nearly every major account Walker's Auto previously held was either with me or actively seeking alternatives.
Dylan
Was floundering, and I didn't have to lift a hand to push him under. That's when I pulled the real trigger. Remember those logs I'd been meticulously maintaining before I left? Every incorrect part Dylan ordered. Every repair I had to redo. Every customer I personally prevented from leaving. I organized them all. Attached invoices, supplier receipts, time cards. It wasn't mere gossip. It was documented evidence that Dylan's leadership had been systematically draining the shop for years. Then I sent it all, neatly compiled in a single PDF, to 2 entities, the bank that held the shop's business loan, and the insurance company that handled their commercial policy. I didn't accuse anyone of fraud. I didn't need to. I simply suggested they might wish to be aware of ongoing management issues that could impact their investment. In business, perception is everything. Suddenly, Walker's Auto wasn't a reliable account. It was a risk. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Jack called me, laughing so hard he could barely articulate the words. The bank froze their line of credit until they resolve management concerns. Insurance wants a full audit. Your mom's panicking. Dylan's blaming the suppliers. Dad's blaming the economy. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just patted Max on the head and returned to working on a Tacoma that required new struts. Because here's the thing about revenge. The best kind doesn't culminate in one dramatic scene. It's a gradual attrition. You reclaim what they took for granted, one piece at a time, until all that remains is the mess they created for themselves. After I exited Walker's Auto, I didn't seek anything flashy. I discovered a small, unassuming place on the outskirts of town. 2 bays, a cracked concrete floor, and an office just large enough for a desk, a coffee maker, and Max's bed. Rent was affordable, work was consistent, and for the first time in years, every dollar I earned remained mine. It wasn't opulent, but it was mine, and that was all I needed. The nature of gradual damage is that people rarely perceive it approaching, until it's already irreversible. By the time Walker's Auto was on its last legs, I didn't have to do anything further. The customers were gone, the suppliers no longer trusted them, and the bank had them under intense scrutiny. I simply kept my head down in my own garage, booked solid for weeks. Then the phone calls began. First, it was Mom. Tyler, things are difficult right now. Perhaps you could visit and speak with your father. Translation: fix the disaster Dylan created without acknowledging he made it. I told her I was occupied, which was true. I had 3 trucks in the bay and a Civic halfway disassembled. Next, Dad called. No pleasantries. Tyler, we're losing customers because you took them, not because Dylan was incompetent. Not because the shop had been mismanaged for years. Just outright blaming me as if I'd robbed them at gunpoint. I didn't bother arguing. I simply stated, I didn't take them, I retained them. You're the reason they departed. Then I hung up. A week later, Jack sent me a text. You might want to drive by the shop today, just for the sight. I didn't want to admit my curiosity, but I drove past anyway. The lot was half empty. No line of waiting cars, no customers in the lobby. One of the large bay doors was jammed halfway open, and weeds were sprouting through the cracks in the pavement. Weeds in September. It resembled a place that had been deserted for months, not a business struggling to survive. The entitled parade. It all culminated 2 days later. I was closing my shop for the night when I heard Max barking. I pulled up the front blinds and saw them, Mom, Dad, and Dylan, standing in my parking lot as if for some sort of intervention. Mom clutched a folder. Dad had his hands jammed into his jacket pockets. And Dylan was leaning against a car like he owned the place. I stepped outside, keeping the door mostly shut so Max wouldn't bolt. Dad began speaking before I was even halfway down the steps. We're in trouble, Tyler. The bank is pressuring us. And without your assistance, Walker's Auto will close. I said nothing, just crossed my arms and waited. Mom stepped forward, her voice soft, as if negotiating with a stubborn child. Honey, this is still your family's legacy. You can't just watch it vanish. We need you back at the shop. Just for a little while, until we stabilize things again. Then Dylan chimed in, smirking. Yeah, and when you return, we can figure out how to make it work without all the drama. That one almost made me laugh. This guy had run the place into the ground and was still acting as if I had been the problem. The offer? I finally inquired, what precisely are you asking for? Dad looked at Mom, then back at me. We need you to bring your customers back, and we need you to put in at least 60 hours a week for the next few months. No pay until the shop is back in the black. Then we'll discuss what's fair. I just stared at him. They were standing in front of my own thriving business, surrounded by cars people trusted me to work on, and telling me to abandon it so I could rescue the very people who had forced me out and stolen my paycheck. That's your grand scheme? I asked. I abandon everything I've built so Dylan can continue playing boss? Mom sighed as if I were being unreasonable. This isn't about Dylan, it's about family. I shook my head. No, this has always been about Dylan, and you made your choice a long time ago. The final nail, Dylan rolled his eyes. You act like you're some genius who created everything from nothing. You just fix cars, Tyler. Anyone can do that. I took a step toward him, not in anger, just completely done. If anyone could do it, the shop wouldn't be collapsing right now. That silenced him. I looked at Dad. Do you recall the day you told me I wasn't getting paid to compensate for losses? That was the day I began ensuring I'd never need you again, and I don't. You wanted Dylan to carry the legacy, so let him carry it. Mom started to interject again, but I cut her off. I'm not coming back. I'm not loaning you money, and I'm not giving you my customers. You have precisely what you requested. Live with it. I turned and re-entered my shop. Locked the door. Max settled at my feet, wagging his tail as if it were all over, and it was. By the end of the month, Walker's Auto was closed for renovations. 2 months later, the sign was gone, replaced by a for lease banner. People in town started recounting stories to me about how it was such a shame the family shop went under. I never corrected them. I simply said, yeah, it is, and returned to my work. Because here's the truth, I didn't destroy Walker's Auto. I just stopped saving it. When Walker's Auto finally shut down, it didn't merely impact the business. It impacted their entire lives. The bank repossessed their house after they defaulted on the business loan. They ended up crammed into a dilapidated rental where the plumbing barely functioned. Dad was performing odd jobs out of the back of a rusty pickup. Mom was working as a cashier, and Dylan was sitting at home, constantly searching for opportunities on his phone. Word about why the shop went underspread quickly. No one wanted to hire Dylan, not even the chain shops desperate for cheap labor. Customers they used to boast about having were now in my bays, handing me keys and remarking, "We wish we'd come to you sooner." I didn't gloat. I simply did the work. It was a rainy Thursday when they appeared at my shop. All 3 of them standing in the lot as if they still owned the place. I stepped outside, arms crossed. Dad spoke first. "Tyler, we need you back. We can get the shop running again if you bring your customers. We'll even discuss pay once things are stable." Mom added, "This is your family. You can't just abandon us." Dylan stood there, smirking as if it were a foregone conclusion. No, you can't run from family forever." I looked at them. Then at the shop behind me, my shop, my customers, my rules. "You had your chance," I said. "You made your choice. Now live with it." I turned and went back inside, locking the door. Max trotted over and lay at my feet. Outside I could still hear them talking, but their voices faded.